He is none other than Mike Florio. How are you, Michael?
Hey, Rich. How are you, pal?
Hanging in there. Hope you had a good Father's Day weekend.
Yep, same to you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Greatly appreciate it. So is Dak going to put his signature on that piece of paper today?
Yeah, it sure sounds that way. And it's kind of a surprise because he had been so dug in, and the impression that we've gotten is he wants his long-term contract by July 15, and if they don't give it to him, he's potentially going to stay away from training camp and preseason. But the bottom line is quarterback's got to be ready to go. And in his mind, this is a contract year just like last year was. Last year was a contract year for $2 million. This year's a contract year for $31.4 million, but it's still a contract year, and he needs to have a good year. He's got a new coach. He's got a new approach. He's got a new everything that he's got to get up to speed with. Now, a lot of same teammates, obviously, same offensive coordinator, but he needs to be ready to go. He's not plug and play like a Le'Veon Bell in 2017. He's the guy who needs to be there, and it also takes off the table the very, very, very slim possibility that the Cowboys would change their mind about rescinding the franchise tender and making him a free agent at a time when everyone's depth chart is set and everyone's budget's been turned upside down.
So why hasn't there been a deal? Is it just a back-end fourth, fifth year? Is it COVID-19 messing potentially with future caps and the Cowboys trying to figure out what that might be before they sign him? What do you think this is?
Well, the easiest impediment, Rich, is that it's a deadline-driven business and the deadline is July 15th.
Right.
And if anybody moves toward their bottom line now, what happens is you're going to get squeezed off of it when it comes time to figure out exactly how much you're going to pay. And if here's my bottom line, well, your bottom line today is going to become your bottom line plus something else on July 14th. So that's part of it. But here's what it comes down to: Dak's got $31.4 million in hand once he signs the franchise tender. Next year, he's in line for a 20% raise if they tag him again. That's $37.68 million. That's $69.08 million combined for 2 years, plus the year 3. What do you do? Transition tag, $45 million. Franchise tag, $54 million for 1 year. Or let him walk away like Kirk Cousins in Washington from a couple of years ago. What do you do? And from Dak's perspective, they need to offer him something that will cause him to say, I'll trade in this bird in the hand for whatever it is that you're offering me. And only Dak knows what the offer is going to be to require him to say, okay, I'll give up my chance to go year to year and make nearly $70 million and potentially force my way to free agency in just 2 years.
So the Cousins route, the Kirk Cousins path to 9 figures in the bank, basically, is what you're saying.
Exactly. And the open market. I mean, look, people get mad at Dak for not taking whatever the Cowboys want to pay him, but the Cowboys have taken full advantage of all rights they have under the CBA. They paid him for 4 years as a fourth-round draft pick, and last year he made $2 million. They didn't give him an extension that he found acceptable. He played that year with the injury risk, and now he's in a spot where they've chosen to apply the franchise tag. They've chosen to apply the exclusive level of the franchise tag at $31.4 million, $5 or $4 million more than what the non-exclusive level would have been. And so now he has rights in the face of that. And his biggest right at this point is to say, I'll take 31.4 now, I'll take 37.68 next year, and then you're going to have to make one hell of a decision in 2022.
Mike Florio here on the Rich Eisen Show. Why does Jerry Jones always do this late with everybody? What's the deal here?
Here's what I think. I think that Jerry believes that when the time comes to throw his arm around a guy, and remember this bubbled up last year with Ezekiel Elliott,
Sure.
And there was talk of how they did it with Des Bryant, how they'll try to negotiate directly with the player, even though they're not supposed to negotiate directly with a player who's represented by an NFLPA certified agent. It happens. And I think they believe that, at the appropriate time, they're going to get Dak to take less than what he otherwise is entitled to. And, they got that with Tony Romo, who was undrafted, who wasn't supposed to be in the NFL at all. He took less than maybe he could have gotten if he had played it out. And I think they've been stunned, big picture, by the fact that Dak didn't take whatever they offered last year before he entered the last year of his contract. There's a Joe Flacco vibe to all of this. Remember, even though Flacco won the Super Bowl and was the MVP and was able to leverage that into the biggest contract ever signed by any quarterback at the time, but he bet on himself. He said no thanks to the offer that the Ravens made in August of 2012, and he won. And even though the Cowboys were 8-8 last year, Dak did the same thing, and Dak won. And here he is with $31.4 million in hand, which is a nice raise over the $2 million he made last year.
Mike Florio here on the Rich Eisen Show from Pro Football Talk and NBC Sports. Asking the poll question, Chris. This is as he traffics in the same world as Sports Talk.
Okay, Mike, you were on the line when we were hashing this out. Which QB would you rather have this coming season? Dak, Kyler Murray, Kirk Cousins, Carson Wentz?
For this season, for one season only?
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather have Kyler Murray, and here's why. And I heard you guys talking about this, and this is something that I've said. In 2017, we saw Carson Wentz in his second year take the NFL by storm until he suffered the ACL injury against the Rams in December. 2018, Patrick Mahomes in his second year took the NFL by storm. 2019, Lamar Jackson in his second year took the NFL by storm. I think Kyler Murray is going to be that guy this year. And I know it's a difficult division, but I guess if you give me the chance to get him out of the NFC West, he's even more attractive. If you get him in any other division in the league, he's the guy I want as my quarterback because I think he's going to explode this year.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And it's amazing the conversation, should he play or should he go to baseball? Like, that was actually a real conversation that was had in America.
Draft pick. I mean, that's the thing. You know, we've seen guys who have had the ability maybe to make it in another sport and be really good in one. This guy had the potential to be really good in two different sports. And he's shorter than me, which makes me like him even more. Somebody in the sport is shorter than me. It's wonderful.
And he's got a quarterback coach situation where they're plugged in, and DeAndre Hopkins being added to that mix. I'm thinking there's going to be a very large Arizona bandwagon as the league year gets closer. And in that front, I guess we should turn to that conversation right now. Mike, what are you hearing about the NFL and the conversations about the 2020 season as we're sitting here right now on the backside of the longest day of the year?
Well, you know, it's funny, Rich. If we pay attention to what's out there publicly, there's enough little pieces that you can string together the popcorn and come to the conclusion it's going to be very difficult to play NFL football this year when we see that X number of Clemson players have tested positive in LSU, and there's an outbreak here, and they shut down this program, and they shut down that program. And then also, I don't feel like there's a true consensus yet between the league and the union as to what they're agreeing to, and the clock is ticking on reaching an agreement on what's going to happen in training camp and beyond. But I circled back with someone who told me in early May that there is an extremely small chance there won't be an NFL season this year. And I felt compelled to circle back because based on everything that had happened last week, I'm thinking, man, this doesn't look as promising as I thought it was supposed to look. But I was told the league is still highly optimistic the games will be played. There's less optimism that fans will be in the stands than there was in early May, but the bulk of the money comes from televising the games, and they continue to be very optimistic. One of the issues is that they believe very strongly that when you're on a football field, when you're not in a confined space, the droplets don't linger the way that they do indoors. Mm-hmm. And the speculation is the outbreak at Clemson, the 23 positives, probably a weight room thing where you got the heavy air, you got guys exhaling, you got other guys right there, and their eyes and their noses can be invaded by the droplets. And I think that is the difference. So the NFL planning very extreme measures to keep people apart indoors. And then when we cross the water's edge to the football field, even though there's no way to socially distance and play football, like Sean McVay said last week, rightly so, there's less of a concern of infection because it's either outdoors or under a giant roof where those droplets can dissipate in a way that they can't inside.
So it's interesting how you mentioned Mike Florio here on the Rich Eisen Show. It's interesting how you mentioned that revenue is generated by the showing of the games, not the showing up to the games. A complete opposite from what it sounds like from Major League Baseball and the continuing argument that it has with its Players Association right now. So what might be between now and the beginning of a season be part of the conversation between the NFL and its Players Association that throws some sort of a speed bump into the plan of having a season? What are you seeing? Is there anything?
There was an idea. Well, now, look, if they're completely wrong about how the virus operates and there's outbreak after outbreak in training camps and they just don't have the bodies that can come in and take the places of the players, and this is different from the replacements in 1987 during the strike because, you know, if you've got half of your starting lineup wiped out because they've tested positive. Even if they're asymptomatic, they're quarantined for 2 or 3 weeks. You go get a left guard who's been sitting on the couch eating pork rinds and watching bowling, and he's the only guy out there, and you put him next to your left tackle, who you're paying $17 million a year to, you're putting that left tackle at risk if you just bring this guy in out of nowhere. And one thing I've been saying, Rich, is they need to consider doing what the XFL did with a ninth team of guys who were not attached to any one team, but they were kept in shape, they were coached, they were practicing, and they were ready to go. And the NFL almost needs to have 2, 3, or 4 of those rosters out there. If there is an outbreak, it's not just like call a guy up and get him in here, regardless of what kind of shape he may be in. It's we have guys who are ready to plug in, and they're not going to compromise the health of the guys next to him. So that's the kind of thing that can make it fall apart. And then from the league and the union standpoint, if the league tries to get money back from the players and the players dig in and say no, that could create an impasse. I don't think it's going to get to that point, though. I think at the end of the day, they'll work out the money. I think at the end of the day, the players have no obligation to say anything other than we have our contracts for this year. Next year is where the conversation gets interesting as to what the salary cap will be in light of what the impact on the cap is as a result of this year's reduced revenue.
Yeah, I mean, again, and that kind of brings us back full circle to the Dak Prescott conversation, because if the Cowboys just say, all right, playing the franchise tag, maybe they're hoping by July 15th there'll be a better idea if there is a deal about how to make sure the 21 and the 22 and 23 cap is handled. So all the teams that planned out their contracts expecting a rising cap, they don't get totally hamstrung and screwed, quite honestly. So we'll see how that all works out. Is there anything else that's going on in the NFL that is taking up so much of the oxygen? Is it what's going on off the field right now, Mike? I mean, what do we discuss, and at what point will we find out, do you think, a date certain by which people are going to be reporting?
I think that we'll know at some point not long after the 4th of July. And, it's time for some agreements to be reached between the league and the union. It's time for the players to understand what's going to be expected of them. And I've heard talk of the possibility of giving players a chance to opt out if they're just not comfortable this year for whatever reason. If they're not comfortable being in that environment, they don't want to potentially infect family members, or they have prior health conditions like a Patrick Peterson who's got diabetes, James Conner who fought cancer. There may be guys who say, I don't want to do this. There may be coaches who say, I don't want to do it. And I think there's going to be an allowance for those people who aren't comfortable going forward in this climate. That's going to be part of it. But we're getting closer and closer, Rich, 5-6 weeks away. If they're going to open training camp on time, some agreements need to be made and announced. And I think that they need to let the rest of us know that, if there is a high degree of optimism behind the curtain that the season's going to go forward, we need to start seeing some of the fruits of that so we can all say, yes, there will be football this year instead of worrying about it for the next 3 months.
I'm just wondering again, Mike, is there a possibility? I mean, now that the NBA has created their bubble world, we're hearing about the ability to, turn the magic ring that people who go and get their passports to fun in Disney World to use to open up their doors of their hotel rooms, to actually add a component to it that can give you an idea if you've got a symptom for COVID-19. I'm just wondering if the NFL, they have to, with all their money and influence and I guess the amount of time that they've had of run up, some sort of technology that we're unaware of, that maybe even the NBA could give a test run in July to allow for better testing, better tracing, better everything to allow for a season to happen. I'm just wondering, are you hearing anything about that?
Oh, yeah, and look, I was told back in early May, and this was the reason why I was told that there's an extremely small chance that the season won't happen. There's a belief that by August and September, there will be rapid response testing, reliable testing, accurate testing. And I've always envisioned, Rich, when you're talking about the petri dish that is an NFL locker room, now there is a way to socially distance, but once you're in the building and the virus is in the building, that's a problem. Once you're on the field and the virus is on the field, that's a problem. And I've always envisioned that there would be basically an airlock where you go in, you take a test, whether it's a saliva test or a finger prick, and 5 minutes later you know whether or not you're positive. And if you're negative, you go in. And if you're positive, you get put in quarantine, and that person never gets through. And I think the duty to the communities includes testing them on the way out as well. so you don't have someone who was negative when they walked in, they're positive walking out, and you're sending them back out to the community without knowing that they're positive. And I was led to believe that the testing will be so prevalent by August or September that they'll be able to do that and test them every day. I've heard other things suggesting they're not going to test them every day, and I look at that and I say, how can you not test every day? And I know there's practicalities involved and expenses involved, but I think that's one of the key components. If you're going to have guys out on a football field sweating and bleeding and, breathing over each other for 3 hours at a time, you need to be certain that anybody who has access to that space is negative.
All right, what else? What's going on in your world? You got your pod, right? You got the Daily Show. You got it all working.
We just keep cranking. We keep cranking, and we keep looking for what's next. And even though there isn't a whole lot of football news because we didn't have an off-season program, we watch what's next. And watch this. After July 15, the next guy to watch is Deshaun Watson, and I'm told that he wants a 3-year extension on the 2 years that he has left with the Texans, and that he's likely to get it. They gave Larry Tunsil a 3-year extension. Usually teams don't do extensions that short. So I think the dominoes are going to go Prescott, then Watson, then Mahomes. And even if Prescott doesn't do a deal, I think Watson wants to wait to see what Prescott does, because I think he's going to take Prescott's deal and say, give me that plus X on top of it, and then Mahomes is going to be the one that just blows everyone out of the water, and I think that thing's coming before the season starts, too.
You know what? It would be smart to do it. It would be smart to do it, and that's why it would be smart for the Joneses to figure it out with Dak now before a new ceiling is set that becomes his floor. So what are the numbers you're hearing for Watson and Mahomes then?
Well, I think Mahomes, we've always heard $40 million or more per year. Now, that becomes complicated because when you talk about $40 million in new money, a 5-year, $200 million extension, that gets added to his 2 existing years, and it ends up being a lot less than $40 million a year. So there's different ways to look at these deals. But I think in terms of new money, it's going to be Dak around 35, Watson around 38, Mahomes around 40 or maybe more. And possibly with Mahomes, Rich, something that I've been advocating for a while and that different players have tried to get but haven't been able to. Mahomes needs to have a set salary or a percentage of the salary cap, whichever is greater. So he's protected against explosions in the cap that make his pay relative to other quarterbacks, relative to other players, seem less. Whether it's 18%, 17%, it's perfectly permissible under the CBA. The teams have resisted it, and if anybody's going to get it, it's Patrick Mahomes.
So you become an 18%er, That's what you're saying, like a 20%er.
Exactly.
Wow. Mike, thanks for the time.
In this situation, it's better to be an 18%er than a 1%.
Well, it certainly puts you in a different bracket, no doubt about that. Thanks for the call, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right, see you, Rich.
You got it. That's Mike Florio at Pro Football Talk. Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.